as everyone is coming in, I just want to welcome you to our webinar today, our Protecting Private Childcares, Navigating Licensing, UPK, VPK, and Workforce Challenges. Our guest with us today is Brian Gutman. He is the Senior Vice President, Public Policy and Government Relations with Learning Care. So as everyone is logging on, I would like for you guys to go ahead and pop in the chat. Let me know what center you're from, what company you're from, and your email. Just to introduce myself, my name is Jessie Wood. I have been in the childcare field for over 18 years. I began my journey as a teacher's assistant, and I worked my way up to director. I am now with Inspire Care 360, and I just love sharing my knowledge with everyone and helping teachers and directors and owners in our field. So as we're waiting for some others, again, just let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. And then as we are going through the webinar, we would like for you to use the chat throughout the discussion to answer any questions that are prompted during the webinar. And if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the Q&A section and we'll be keeping an eye on them. I see some from New Jersey, San Antonio, Texas, Corpus Christi. As we are working through our webinar, our agenda today is just to welcome everyone, and we're going to do some housekeeping, talking about what IC360 offers. We are going to be highlighting specifically today our ECE Growth Academy and our discount school supply. We're going to meet our guest, Brian Gutman. We are going to have our discussion, and then we have a special drawing today of two $250 gift cards for discount school supply. So stay with us all the way to the end so we can see who wins those. New Mexico. We got some people from all over. North Carolina, Virginia. Welcome, everyone. We are having a certificate as part of the webinar for our childcare people. You can get a 1-hour CEU for attending today. Go ahead, and if you are looking for that certificate, you can copy and paste the link that is in the chat or that is up on your screen, and you can register to get that certificate. All right. So I would like to introduce you to our host, Tony DiAgostino. He's an owner and operator of 4 ECE schools. He has 30 years of experience with talent, people, and learning, and he has founded IC360.
Well, hey, Jesse, thanks so much. I really appreciate you introducing and welcoming everybody. So thanks so much for the handoff. I know you'll be in the background, so I will take the baton from here if that's okay.
All right.
Great. So do appreciate, I know we still have more people coming on. We had a whole bunch of people who registered for this. And for some reason, if you're not able to watch all of this, there will be a replay of this that will be sent out to you. However, we have some very special programs today that we are offering as an incentive also to stay all the way through. This is really going to be a good one though today, I think. So when we do get into this and start talking to Brian, I think you're going to find it to be rather interesting. Um, so with that said, let me move forward. One of the first things I wanted to do is announce a continuation of a strategic partnership. And that is that we have developed to the next level a relationship with our friends at Discount School Supply. Now, Discount School Supply has been part of Inspire Care 360's membership program as part of our GPO, our group purchasing organization. We've had that relationship for over 10 years. What they do is specific to our members with Inspire Care 360. If you are a member to us, not a subscriber to just some software, but just a member in general, that gives you a number of different features and functions and values. You can get up to 20% off with Discount School Supply. But the big part of that 20% off is because once in a while you see a coupon or the like, is you do get that off of all their drop ship, which is the majority of their inventory is, well, I shouldn't say inventory, but the majority of their catalog is drop ship. So you don't have it just for their, catalog items. But what we are now doing is Discount School Supply will be offering to its members going forward Inspire Care 360, specifically our ECE University. And our ECE University is a offering that allows for just subscriptions to our content alone. So those are a relationship with their team are going to be bringing to their audiences our professional and our teachership development courses all the way across the country for every state because it meets all the continuing education unit needs and the like. But they also are doing something super special for us, and we're going to be talking about that in just a moment. So let's continue on here because one of the big items that we're going to talk about before we get into the little offering at the end about discount school supply is a special program that we have developed that has been taken on board by a number of our different members and companies, but we're doing a very special promotion with it today. And this is for our ECE Growth Academy. Before you've heard of boot camps and the like, specific for administrators or owners. Well, this is a 16-hour program and it qualifies for 1.6 CEU hours that it's available. It's delivered as an e-course with a pathway. So one course gets delivered. Once you finish it, go on to the next one. But the thing that's really special about this program is the kind of challenges it drives at trying to help solve. So if you have new administration, which oftentimes we do, I have schools myself, which many of you know, and or you have had long-term administrative people, sometimes the enrollment skills fall by the wayside as the skills around taking care of the children, focusing on recruiting and the staff, focusing on making the families happy has taken precedent, and for good reason. Oftentimes, a lot of the people who tend to lead our centers have wonderful ability in the engagement of children and the engagement of families and staff. But an area they tend not to have gone to school for quite often is the marketing side of things. So there's marketing opportunity there. And then when you look at other areas too, oftentimes our childcare schools are highly dependent upon doing a lot of Google ads. It is very expensive, as we all know, to continue to do Google ads for our schools, and you're in direct competition oftentimes with your neighbors in the childcare business around you. And it's all about buying placement and the like. This program you'll see has something different to offer. And each school executes differently. So if you have more than one location for your schools, or your directors do, or have a different location for each, or you have multiple locations you engage with, quite oftentimes they handle the whole identity of their program, the way they market it, the way they tour it, the way they conduct and execute it, all in different ways, when a uniform approach most oftentimes produces the best results. Some of you have CRMs or lead generation tools out there, and those help you stay organized and staying in front of prospects and the like. And it also should help with follow through. But quite oftentimes, we've noticed, and I've seen it even personally, where someone calls in, or an assistant or a teacher answers the phone, says, hey, the director's not in now, or the enrollment specialist is not in, we'll have you call back. That connection never happens. So it really talks an awful lot about how can you really do the right thing and make sure you're having all your admins really connecting with those prospects. And new and existing teachers, oftentimes, since we have so many new teachers that come in and so many new assistants, quite often they don't understand their role in the touring process or the enrollment process too, where they are a fundamental element of it quite oftentimes. And as a administrator, quite often you're not sure, how do I best leverage a teacher? How do I best make sure they're prepared if a parent has a question while we're giving them a tour? And then finally, you have new family welcoming experience. So you've done all this work, you've done the background, and now you look to bring them on board. And then you have a bad onboarding experience or something where they walk in first day and people are walking around and they're not sure what to do. So it really talks to your team about this. So what we developed is our ECE Enrollment Growth Academy. This has got a number of, you'll see a testimonial coming out soon on this. And what it includes in this program is 8 different modules. One of them is understanding your market, and that is where we actually teach people how to do a SWOT analysis, understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, your threats, how to take that, as well as understanding and doing a competitive analysis to the other schools that are around you that are not owned and operated by you. And then looking at family and revenue growth process for your center. So looking at best practices around tuition strategy, and how to make that happen. And then also, your team really is the secret sauce to winning over tours in that tour process. How do you ensure that those new families, those prospective families, get connected and understand the value of your team that you've brought out? And then what should be your tour process? So this isn't about saying, here's a roadmap, you have to do exactly this and this. This talks about leveraging your best value that you bring to the table, the differentiations that you bring. And then the enrollment process. Quite oftentimes, many even different schools do a different kind of enrollment process, and advanced enrollment strategies, as well as then how do you plan to make sure that you're ready, that you're bringing on the right resources to look at that enrollment growth. So today only, well, I shouldn't say today only, but today we have a very special program that we're putting in place. We're offering this program, which is normally on ECE University for $349 for one individual. Today, special program for $25. That's going to be put as a link in the chat. And this program that is for $25 is just till 5 p.m. today. It goes up to $125 for someone who'd like to buy it up to Friday. The promotion code for the $25 today is Growth Live. This covers one of your admin people. You're welcome to buy several of these and then hand them out to your different admin people that you have, if you have that capability of doing that. And we'll be revisiting this throughout the presentation on the chat side of things. And again, we are really looking forward to seeing how we can help you. Now, we talked about the discount school supply, and what we have is with our program here is at the end of our presentation, we are giving away 2 gift cards for $250 each. So those are some great programs to help, introduce and do a little bit of the welcome for this next level of relationship we have with Discount School Supply. So we're going to thank our friends there for offering those very lucrative cards that can be used pretty much for anything for your school. And so now I would like to introduce and have come on up Brian Gutman. And Brian is leading Learning Care's federal, state, as well as local advocacy. He has been doing this for a bunch of different schools, working with policymakers across multiple states and really working on different elements across the board from reform to subsidies to workforce focus around compensation. Really, if you think about it, is really those elements that we talk about advocacy, advocacy that connects the value of what childcare offers to our local state as well as our federal government. Is that a good way to put it, Brian? Or would you like to elaborate better than what I've
Yeah,
done?
I think that's right, but it at the end of the day is all about how this impacts the business and the families that we serve. And I think that's as true of a larger provider like Learning Care as it is for um, an individual center owner. It's really about how do we piece this together so that um, our businesses are able to thrive under the policy environment, um, regardless of who's regulating it, and that our families are able to afford and access the care that they need when they need it, in the setting of their choice. And
Wonderful.
that's what we're all about.
And that's great. And Brian, he works for another childcare business with Learning Care. And actually, I just interviewed on one of our podcasts, John Bork, who said, "Hey, listen, you really want to have a conversation with Brian. He's doing some really interesting things." And that really was the generation for this. So, Brian, welcome today. In
Thanks.
addition to explaining who you are and what you do, Brian and I had actually a chance to talk because of my schools being in New York. We actually connected maybe over a year ago where we were talking about some of the challenges in our state. So today is not going to be really state specific, but these are questions about what level of involvement you can get forward when it comes to advocacy, as well as how to sort of investigate some of the opportunities as well as the challenges that we have. So today, this is a little bit of a question and answer, and I'm going to advocate here, but I would like to say for those of you who do have a question for Brian, do not hesitate to put a question in the Q&A that'll pop up here. So instead of using the chat for that, where there might be some internal discussions going back and forth, just pop them up in the Q&A and I'll bring it up to Brian for his attention. So with that said, let me start with the very first question. It says, I run one or two centers and I'm not a policy person. Where do I begin to advocate for myself and our industry? And I know this. I have three schools. I've had up to six schools. We're super busy. But Brian, when you look at the smaller schools, we don't have that footprint and we don't have that financial backing or the time. Where do you think a person who's leading or operating an organization like that can start getting themselves involved appropriately?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I want to make sure that this is um, as as good a use of time for everybody who's attending as possible. So if you do have questions, please do drop them in the Q&A. Um, you know, where to start is frankly going to be with your state elected officials. Um, Most of childcare, once you're up and running, is regulated at that state level. That's licensing and enforcement, um, relicensing and enforcement, as well as if you're taking subsidy dollars, that's the place where the lion's share of the regulations exist. It's also the place where the lion's share of the challenges exist. Um, so what do I mean by that? If you don't know who represents both yourself as a constituent, and your place or places of doing business, if you don't know who is your state representative and your state senator, that's something you can change today. Just about every state in the country has a tool on their state legislature's website, where you can throw in your address and it's going to give you the district and the representative or representatives who are in your area. Do that for your home, do that for your business or businesses. Um, that's the starting point, but it's not actually enough for you to know who they are. They need to know who you are. And you don't want to walk into the office of a lawmaker when you've got a really big ask. don't make the first time that you have a conversation with them when you're asking them to oppose a popular bill or support something that is abstract from their day to day. I'd encourage you to find out who those people are if you don't already know, and then reach out. Find an opportunity to build a relationship. That might mean you going to them, taking a day off of your regular job, a morning, and going to the state capitol, having prearranged meetings with them and their staff. Even better, find an opportunity to meet them in the community. State reps and state senators are hyper local, and there may be other names. We hear representative, assembly member, and delegate pretty frequently used for the lower house, for the House of Representatives or whatever it may be in your state. But when they're at a parade, when they're at a community fair, whatever it might be in the community, go up and introduce yourself. Find an opportunity to tell them about what you're doing, not with an ask, but with the intent of building relationship. When you need to call on them to educate them on a bill, to ask them to vote against something or for something, that gives you the benefit of already being on their radar. It's a relationship. It's just a whole lot easier to actually gain traction when you're not walking in with your hand out.
So, and it's a really good point, Brian. I think that you make is, don't come first with your hand out, but maybe there's an opportunity in any kind of alliance you build of what you can sort of bring to the table too first. And one of the areas is childcare, as we know, has been a really hot topic, I think, through the US. It has been on both sides of the aisle a hot topic. Some of the areas, just to give you my own personal experience, and I'd love your opinion on it, but it is where I've had some success, not always, but because you have been open, even if you've been open for 5 years, 10 years, you can still do a grand opening or a kickoff, to your school and invite one of your state reps or assembly person or a legislator to say, hey, we want to do a re-grand opening. A lot of times you can get the county, supervisor there. You can get your county state senator who would come by. They love these kind of photo ops, especially with childcare. Them circled around with a whole bunch of kids. I had a chance to do it with my schools and two different situations with two different schools, had two of the different state senators that showed up for that. That was one of the opportunities. Candidly, another one, which I'm not saying you need to do, but I've had experience with, was making a personal donation. You make a personal donation to a person's campaign, and oftentimes that helps pave the way to a conversation if you seem not to be getting the kind of traction. But that's a tricky business, Brian. What are your thoughts when it comes to things like donations and that?
Yeah, so let me first start on the easy one, which is the tour, and I'm happy to go into more details on this later. And for context, Learning Care has about 1,100 locations across 40 states and DC. I sit atop a team of 5 that do this work on a daily basis. So uh, just in terms of the type of scale that I'm going to describe, we in an average year do about 40 lawmaker tours between state and federal lawmakers. Those are tightly orchestrated and great opportunities. A grand opening or a re-grand opening is a great idea. So is a preschool graduation, and so is just an invite for a tour. Again, if it's of interest to the group, I'm happy to go into more detail on what makes for a good tour, but it's a great opportunity. Political giving is I'll say a necessary evil in some cases. First and foremost, you shouldn't be giving if you're uncomfortable with it. This should be in furtherance of your goals, not in spite of your goals. But I will also advise that while it's an important tool, it is not a standalone tool. If the only thing you're going to do all year is write a check to your state representative's campaign fund, save yourself the money and spend it on something else. It's really about how that goes together. So it can be an effective tool when you're relationship building, when that campaign contribution is also being done in conjunction with building a more durable relationship, seeing them at that community function, visiting them periodically in their office, giving them an update on the business, telling them what your struggles are, having them out for a tour. When you bring all the pieces together, a contribution can be meaningful. And again, if the only thing you're doing is the contribution, you're not going to make a difference. This is really about building that durable relationship.
Stephanie on here said, invite them to your center, and you mentioned about doing a tour. Why don't you touch on that just for a minute about if you're able to get one of your state legislators in, what is the best way to try to facilitate that to get the best bang for the buck for building that relationship?
That's a terrific question. So, the way that I would start by thinking about a senator for an elected official is that you are still selling your center no different than a prospective family. The outcome is usually different. Most of the time, you're not asking for an enrollment, although I have seen it happen before that you happen to get an enrollment out of a great lawmaker tour. That's the cherry on top. But don't expect that to be the case. But you are selling your tour, and you are selling your school, and you already know what the elements are that make for a great tour. How is this person greeted at the door? What is the feeling that they get when they walk into the building and go classroom to classroom? What is the distinguishing factor between your center and the center next door or the center down the street? And telling them a little bit about what you're doing. I would recommend being brief. We usually target our tours from arrival to departure to be no more than an hour. I would recommend being prepared. With our scale, while we do have a government relations representative almost always on site, we're also not the ones that are leading the tour because we're not the ones who know the business best. We're having the director lead the tour in almost every case. And so we're doing in our case, a prep call, a prep meeting where we're saying, here's what we expect. Here's the flow. Here's the 3 things that we want to make sure that we talk about while they're visiting. Many of those are core to our business. So if we're in a center that has a really high military childcare enrollment, that's something we want to make sure that we're mentioning. We want to make sure that we've got those stats at our fingertips and that we know our data and know our story and can weave it together as we go through the center. And then finally, I would really recommend ending a tour with reading to children. I would suggest your 3 or 4-year-old aged classrooms. Those tend to be a little bit better than reading to toddlers and a little bit less unruly. I would also suggest that if you're going to make that invite, make it early, make it often, and be prepared. So when we're facilitating a tour invite, we always ask if they'd like to read a book to a classroom. No matter what their staff's answer is, we make sure that we know what classroom we're going to read in, that we've got books pre-selected, that the teachers in that classroom are aware that we're going to be stopping by with a special guest that we may be asking to read, and that they're ready for that. And I say that because there's a higher rate than you would expect where the staff say, no, we're not going to read. We're going to do a quick tour. This will be 40 minutes in, out, and on with our life. And as we're walking through, at some point, the lawmaker says, oh, I hope I have a chance to step into a classroom and read a book. The reason I say to have the books available is when you think about your typical elected officials, we have many who have young children. We have many others who have not had a firsthand childcare experience in many decades. They are not always going to be the best judge of an age-appropriate book. I don't necessarily love when they show up with a book in hand because we never know what we're going to get. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not, but we're always prepared.
It's a really good idea. And one other area I do know when I had the last state senator I had come through mine, he also wanted to take some photos, which
Yep.
was great. But one of the things you have to be prepared for is making sure you have sign off from your families that photos
Yeah.
are okay, because the photos that are being taken usually are not just from your team. They're usually from the state representative that wants to capture a few photos. So sometimes you do have families, because of politics or the like, don't want their kids to participate. So it's not a bad idea, probably, I would say, to check with your families that, hey,
Yeah.
if we're having a state person come through, is it okay if they're involved in any photos?
Yeah, and they're gonna all be out for that. I'll add one more thing to that, and then one other piece of what makes a great tour is the follow-up. But what I'll note on that is our media release does not cover third parties. So when we are clear ahead of time from the member who's touring that that's what they're wanting to do, what we usually do is try to identify one or two classrooms where we're going to seek third party media releases. Otherwise, it's a whole lot of chasing people down and a big invite for pushback against whomever is walking the halls that day. It's usually not worth it.
Yeah.
What we will more often do is inform that office ahead of time that while we love to get pictures with them of them with staff, and we're happy to take and share photos that have the back of children's head. The book reading is a great opportunity to crouch down behind a group of children and get the backs of their head with the lawmaker's face in it. That our media release doesn't cover that third party, so that we're on the same page ahead of time. That also creates a great opportunity to follow up, just like the meetings, just like the tours. You mentioned this up top with that missed phone call. Follow up is critically important. If you're going to put the time into a meeting, if you're going to put the time into a tour, make sure you're also putting time into the follow up. And when you're getting those photos, it's a great opportunity to reach out later in the day or the next day. Here are the 3 or 4 photos that I got. Thanks so much for coming to our center.
That's awesome. And I appreciate that background on that, Brian, and the guidance on that. That's very helpful. I think we sort of hit this one on how much time it takes, but in general, we did for sort of a tour. How much time do you think really a month to be an advocate are you really having to invest to, not let things just happen to you, but to be on sort of more of the tip of the spear of what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah, everybody on this call has an awful lot of time. I'm grateful that you've given some time to me today. You've got busy jobs. Don't overcomplicate this. It doesn't need to be a lot of time. What I would really emphasize above all else here is quality over quantity. If you can build one or two close relationships with lawmakers who trust your judgment, trust your expertise on this, you're far, far better off than if you have borderline relationships with 15 lawmakers. So I would really think about how much can you afford to give out of your time to build these relationships. And if the answer is an hour a month, that's great. Spend that hour a month well and make sure that you're touching base with the 2 or 3 local elected officials and their staff, giving that business update, periodically traveling to them, finding an opportunity to seek them out where you're in the same place, and tell them about what's going on and what the challenges are. It can make a really, really big difference just to spend that little bit of time periodically with a couple of lawmakers who are genuinely going to have your back.
Awesome. When we look at it too, is spending time not only with the lawmakers, but when it really comes to advocacy, a lot of times the advocacy is not just with the lawmakers, it happens to be with your licensing. It
Yep.
happens to be things that we talked about on the front end of this too. That, a new thing for us over the past 5 years has been UPK or VPK programs and the like, and you really want to have an impact. So, here's a question. What can I actually do to move the needle? Does my testimony really matter, or am I just one of a million voices?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think anybody who is given that testimony knows the feeling of sitting for an ungodly period of time just to get up and read, 2 minutes of testimony to a mostly empty dais. Um, so here's what I'll say. Testimony matters, but probably not in the way you think. Um, it does a couple of important things. One, it helps lawmakers gauge support. I can tell you, I was last on a lawmaker's staff many years ago, 20 plus years ago, and on issues that were not of great importance to us. All that incoming email traffic that we would get would essentially be dumped into two folders, the for and the against, so that we could have a general idea of the incoming to our office. You know, is it 2/3 are supporting and 1/3's opposing, or virtually every contact is in the same direction? And what we see is, same thing. We don't ever want to be on the losing side of an issue because we just didn't show up. We want to make sure that if we're opposing legislation, that there's lots of people saying, "Wait a minute, you might have a problem here." That surface level indicator of support or opposition, which is really easy to manufacture. I'm not suggesting you manufacture it. What I'm saying is people on the other side might just, to make sure that lawmakers have a decent barometer of, is this a great idea or is this a terrible idea? Again, I mentioned follow up. There's a really important opportunity here to follow up. That's everybody who sits on that committee, whether they are there or not. Testimony generally goes into a record. That record is not necessarily scrubbed by the lawmakers voting on the bill. So it's a great opportunity to reach out by email to the lawmakers that sit on that committee and say, "Hey, thanks so much for having a hearing about UPK. Really exciting opportunity for our families. We need to make sure that it rolls out well so that centers can participate, families can have access and access the care that they need. Here's my testimony on that. Would welcome any questions you have. To reach out to those 2 or 3 members who you've built that relationship with. They may or may not sit on the relevant committee, but they tend to know the others at least within their caucus, if not within their chamber. Here's my testimony. There's a really well-intended licensing bill, but I'm really concerned about some of the potential impacts. Here's what I have to say about it. Let's have a conversation. Or can you help make sure that the committee members who are considering this know that there's a lot on the line? It's really that it's a great entry point. Again, like the question on contributions, if the extent of your advocacy is writing a page and a half of testimony and sending it in or reading it to an empty dais, you're wasting your time. That alone isn't enough.
So when you do talk about, also putting together some kind of testimony, you have a point of view, you feel that something like you mentioned could be implemented better, or there's something on the horizon that's coming up that gets you very concerned. What is the kind of, let's just say written, because sometimes before you're going down to the Capitol and you're sitting in front of lawmakers or lack thereof,
Yeah.
um, and having a conversation, oftentimes you're writing a sort of a point of view paper. And as your testimony, how, obviously we have wonderful things like ChatGPT and Claude and all that that's sort of taking over our ability to write things. But from a person's point of view, and from what you've seen impactful, what are the kind of testimonies written that resonate, that seem to be, okay, this is something I can work with?
Yeah. Well, I definitely suggest that you know your information. How many folks do you employ? How many families do you touch? How long have you been a pillar of the community? But beyond that, I focus on telling your story above all else. It's important to weave it in. But everyone on this webinar, everybody who's listening in, has their own personal story. Nobody falls into ECE accidentally. Everyone is driven for a reason. Talk about your why. Why do you do what you do every day? Why does it matter to your families? Who is that little child who your staff, your center have had a huge impact on? Who's the parent who is only able to work because of what you do? show up with that why. It is so much more compelling to sprinkle your data through that or to put it at the beginning and the end, to have your call to action somewhere within there, but to really put it inside of a narrative arc.
Well, and and I think it's really important where you're talking about is to make sure to get your why across. Is there things you should stay away from? Because a lot of times things can get pretty emotional.
Yes.
And you just recently had where half your preschool walks out the door of third graders because they're going to do a pre-3 program now in your area, and you
Yep.
just want to light up the Capitol like the 4th of July.
Yep.
So what should you stay away from, honestly?
Yeah. This is really a question about how we show up. I will tell you that in the legislation that we are most concerned about, we take great strides to make sure that we don't just show up oppositionally. We really want to show up to help policymakers get the design of their bill right, or at least better. So we want to make sure that when we're showing up, we're bringing operational realities to the table. Because you're right, Tony, a poorly designed or a poorly implemented UPK program can mean the end of your 4-year-old program and a downstream impact on your pricing for infants, toddlers, and threes.
Yeah.
And a well-designed pre-K program can mean a more stable workforce with greater career paths. It can mean greater affordability for families, and it can mean extended retention of families. Three things that I would be hard pressed to find a provider on this call that opposes. It's all about how it's designed. And so ultimately, when we show up, we're looking to get a bill that helps children, families, and the workforce that meets the reality of owning and operating centers. So this is really where your community ties and where your firsthand experience can come in. I would urge you not to show up, with a hair on fire mentality. This is the end of childcare as we know it. And instead, to know your information, to know your why, and to be able to talk about how what is, in almost every case, a well-intended concept can be improved to avoid the negative impacts that some bills will very predictably have. It's
Yeah.
also true, and this is where I would urge you to get involved in other advocacy efforts. Sometimes we need to pivot to a better alternative because there are bills that are just not realistically going to be saved. There are bills that are ideologically opposed to childcare as we know it. And so there is an opportunity in those instances. You're not going to win on the terms as defined. So it's about showing up and saying, okay, what's the motivation behind it? How close can we get to a reasonable compromise? And is there a pathway to having that alternative come to life instead of the original bill proposed? That's really hard to do as a side gig to operating your business in an area where I would really encourage you to be involved in effective advocacy, coalitions, organizations, state associations, the like.
Well, and what you mentioned, I think is important. It sort of leads into this next question a little bit, Brian, in the opposite respect, because if you're opposing something or you're having an issue with a state policy, one of the things that I know you and I talked about this in a pre-call is sometimes you feel like you're sticking your neck out there if you want to speak up because you're
Yeah.
like, the last thing I want is any kind of retaliation from my licensor or my licensor feel like I'm going against them. Because if
Yeah.
I'm going against them, then I'm going to get visits. Next thing you know, CPS is walking in my door for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, you're also looking at part of an advocacy group. Obviously, you're one of many instead of just yourself. But what are things that you can look at on how to engage policy without putting yourself at risk?
Yeah, couple things here, and what a very fair and valid concern. Nobody wants to put a target on their back. First of all, when we talk about policymakers, it's really easy to focus on your state rep, your state senator, um, and people in that vein. But do remember that both the agency heads and the senior leaders within that agency are policymakers as well. And so as you think about who are the 2 or 3 people that you're going to engage, consider the head of the department. Consider the head of whatever vertical within the department is most relevant to you. Maybe that's childcare licensing, maybe it's the pre-K program in your state, maybe it's something else altogether. There's a balancing act there. Do I want to draw that attention to myself? That's an answer for you to decide. But in general, I would really suggest that you think about agency conflict, including around regulation and enforcement, no different than the way you address other forms of conflict that exist within a childcare center with families or staff. I would be willing to wager that most of the people who are willing to show up today are going to raise concerns in a professional manner rather than a personal manner. That they're going to focus on the facts, not a dramatic interpretation of the facts and the events.
You,
And as business owners, I suspect that you don't love surprises, and neither does anybody else. So I think that it really, really goes a long way when you're going to show up, that you show up constructively. That again, you're taking an improvement focused mindset. Not all change is bad. Not all change is going to end the industry as we know it, even if some change forces us to work differently. To really take a close look and understand, hey, what are the pieces of this proposal that are totally non-workable versus what are the pieces of this proposal that need to be reconsidered or tweaked a bit. And ultimately, there are times that we need to be critical. We shouldn't stay silent if the proposal is let's just have all 3 and 4 year olds go to public schools and that's going to resolve all of America's childcare woes. Like we understand the ripple impacts of that type of a proposal, which we do sometimes hear. And so when those are what's being proposed, and you do need to be highly critical, consider how you can make your case most effectively um, with facts rather than personal attacks in a professional manner without surprises. And sometimes also thinking about who the right voice is. It might not be the voice of the individual provider if it's a highly critical response. You might be better off looking at a coalition of providers or a childcare association where you're bringing greater scale and you're one of a crowd rather than one individual who's screaming from the side.
yeah, and I appreciate that insight. It's funny because I've had both experiences where I've probably gone in early on in my career a little too heavy, a little too fast with people, and they've taken an affront and it gets them defensive, right? No longer are they listening. They are just trying to figure out how do I get out of this? And there's no value in that. You're not going to get much. I think where I've seen one time, a few times, but this time in particular with success was I was addressing in New York State the UPK issue. And instead of taking the approach, I went to licensing about it. And I said, hey, listen, I'm interested in addressing the UPK because this is what the public school district just happens to be for New York State. Every state's different. And
Yep.
so I said, what are their thoughts and what are their feelings in licensing about who and how this program should be managed? Oh, and you should have sent me a response. I went to the senior most person and I CC'd my local regional because I didn't want to feel like I was going over her head.
Mm-hmm.
But the senior most person in the state, she lit up like the 4th of July and she's like, I think we need to have a role. I think we need to be doing this. And all of a sudden, she was sort of backing the idea more than she saw this as a conflict or an ask of her. She all of a
Yep.
sudden saw it as, hey, you know what? We really need to be more a part of this because it's so different. So I've seen where I've totally tripped over myself as to other
Yep.
times where I may have possibly gotten it right. So
Yeah.
with that saying though, one of the things you talked about was advocacy with advocacy
Yeah.
groups. How about with your families or your staff? Is there a way to leverage them in a way with policymakers in a way that you don't feel like you're abusing those teams or those groups?
Yeah, and this is really tricky. And I think ultimately you want to make it easy and you want to make it authentic. Um, you know, so what I would suggest is that before you ask your families, and with staff, you've also got labor law considerations, and that's going to be very state specific. So I'll focus on families, and it may apply to staff depending on your state and your legal counsel. Um, but start with a question about whether this is going to undermine your business. Is this going to risk relationships that you've spent a long time building? There are ways to do this well. What I would suggest is explain to your families your viewpoint on why this is good or bad. And sometimes that's not going to be the obvious conclusion that most of your families might reach in reading a one sentence summary of the bill or the regulation. Be really clear about your interest. Make sure that you're being transparent because oftentimes there are both concerns or opportunities for our families, and there are different concerns or opportunities for our businesses. And lastly, make it really easy. If you want your families to send an email to the local state rep or to the head of childcare licensing on whatever the issue is, pre-draft it, give them that copy, identify the email address or email addresses that they can send it to. You want them to pick up the phone and make a phone call, give them the 2 or 3 bullet points that they ought to mention and the phone number. Make it as easy and quick as possible. But again, you don't want to find yourself in a position where your families feel used. You have to be upfront about why it impacts you and why it impacts them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good idea. And one of the things that comes to mind is just the old adage, tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you told them. So when you talk to your families up front, never hesitate that if you are advocating or you see yourself advocating, saying, hey, there might be some things coming up this year that we're going to be coming to you for an ask. So when you do, just like any other ask you have, you've already laid the groundwork and they don't see this as something fresh or something that they're going to panic under. And I also think it's probably not a bad idea to give them the temperature of the issue. So if it's really a big issue or if it's
Yeah.
a really inflamed issue that you have to handle.
Yep. We also try to be really, really selective of when we're going to make that ask. We do it, but we do it reluctantly. We make sure that it really is necessary and not
Right.
just convenient.
Yeah. And that oftentimes is when it's going to be a bill that's going through the House and you have many different
Yep.
lawmakers looking at it and they just need voices. They need
Yeah,
volume
that's
of
right.
voices.
That's right. That's when we're trying to drive up the number in one of those email folders over the other.
Right. So if you do find that there's some legislation, and quite oftentimes we know this too. Sometimes you have educators who don't play in the childcare space.
Yeah.
You have legislators who don't really understand the childcare space. So they have great intention. But when you look at some of the regulations or legislation they're putting in place, you're like, oh, this is just crazy. This cannot even be managed. How do you look at trying to make a point without it coming across as, they're really messing things up, I guess you would say.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. And this is the area where I see, in particular, smaller providers struggle the most. And it makes sense, right? A threat to the business is a threat to your livelihood. It's a threat to your families. It's a threat to your staff. It's not intentional, but when providers show up and just lay it all out there, or are emotional about the impact of a new safety reg driving up the cost of care, it tends to actually be really, really damaging. You've got a lot of expertise. You've got passion for all the right reasons, and you know the operational details. Um, I would really suggest again that you start and that you end with the impact for children and families instead of lighting up the panel around why this is such a clearly horrible idea, even if it is, really get into the root of the why it's a bad idea, or why you support it. There are lots of proposals that sound great from a child safety standpoint And we all know from operating that it actually undermines the goal of child safety. Um, Things that sound great from a compensation standpoint, but actually will price our families out of care. So really think about those components. What's the real root of the challenge or the opportunity here? And how can you contextualize it within the daily experience of your families and your parents rather than showing up as an operator screaming about another regulation?
Yeah.
Even if it's true, it doesn't land.
Yeah. And we have time probably for one more question, Brian, because we've already come to our time. And so let me just go to this last one here.
Yeah.
What is the single highest leverage thing I can do in the next 30 days?
Yep. Establish a relationship. This goes back to the first question. Go ahead and find one or two lawmakers who are really going to matter on the issue because they represent you or they represent your business or they regulate you, and reach out to set up a meeting. Um, Before the meeting, know your elevator pitch, right? What's your why? Who are you and what's your why? What are the couple of things that are at the top of your mind? This is not about making an ask. This is about starting a relationship. Don't walk in and be transactional. It's okay if this is a 10-minute meeting. And then please, please, please follow up from the meeting. You're going to be, for most lawmakers, one of 10 or 15 meetings in a day. They might just not remember you 4 months down the line. So make sure that within about 48 hours of your meeting, you're sending them a note. Thanks for the conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to talk about these three things during our meeting. Or so glad you were able to come out. I promised you that I was going to follow up with this piece of information. Here it is. We'd love to have you out for a tour.
Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, I've also noticed with the different lawmakers I've met with, they always have some type of an assistant who is willing to be the first line. Having a
Yep,
relationship with that assistant actually is pretty powerful too, because they tend to be the pathway to future meetings and events. So
absolutely.
at least that's some of the experience that I've had.
Yeah.
But overall, Brian, I want to thank you greatly. I know the time just flew by. We could talk about this easily for another hour or two. And at least for me, I know it's super interesting. So I want to thank you greatly. What do you have on your agenda in the next few months here, where what you're trying to do with moving the needle?
My team and I are, again, we're across 40 states and DC. We're now mostly through legislative sessions. We've got a lot still going in the Northeast and in California. We're prepping for next year. We think that next year is going to be heavily focused on the ownership structures of childcare, on the expansion of public pre-K programs. I see a note here in the chat about New Mexico. Oddly enough, I spent a couple of days in Denver, mostly on the phone with officials in New Mexico as House Bill 241 was rolling through there this past session. Um, and we continue to see real opportunity in the tax space to help bring down the cost of care. So while there's a whole bunch of other issues, we're continuing to work across those. And we expect to be deeply engaged in 25 or so states come next session in most of them.
Well, really appreciate the insights that you've given us today and the engagement on this topic. We may have you back if that's okay at some point in time.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Wonderful. So I want to thank Brian greatly. We only have a couple more minutes here and just want to get through a couple things. But Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. And let's go through and just make sure we cover a little bit more of the housekeeping before we end up. And so again, if you do want a certificate, all you have to do is make the request. Here's the URL, and we'll have Jess put the URL in the chat to make sure if you want to get your certificate. Again, what we have is we have the ECE Growth Academy program that we talked about, really special program for today only. At 349, we're just doing the $25 per person. One of the reasons is we want a number of you to experience this. And candidly, we may be coming back to you for some testimonials to see how well it went. And that's one of the reasons we want to offer this for you. With that said, what we're going to do is we are now going to talk about the gift cards and look at who we have. And let me see if my team has spun the raffle wheel out there. And I don't know if they have yet. If they haven't, what we are going to do because of our time frame is we will be reaching out to you today and letting you know if you have won and the gift card that you have received. So we want to thank everybody for joining today. And if you have any questions about our programs, what we've done today, or any interest in what we can do in the future for presentations, please do not hesitate to let us know. We're greatly appreciative and we want to really thank all of you for attending. And we wish you the very best and we hope you have a very good day. This is Tony DiAugustino with Inspire Care 360. We wish you the best. Take care now. Bye-bye.